This video is going to talk about the writing process. We have studied grammar in class, and we've talked about punctuation and spelling, and you have done one in-class writing. This video is going to talk about the writing process that takes you from the very beginning, starting to think about your writing, to the very end, when you have your writing finished and it is your best product. So the process includes pre-writing, organization, first draft, revision, and final draft. Pre-writing. So you want to think about why are you writing, whom are you writing to, and what kind of information ideas do you want to communicate. So this is where you start thinking about your topic and what ideas you want to write about for your topic. You can do pre-writing in different ways. You can make a list, you can do free writing, or you can do a diagram. To make a list, don't worry about mechanics, don't worry about spelling or grammar, punctuation. You're just going to write down words or phrases and write down anything you think of. So for example, if I'm going to write about my life, I want to make sure to include that I finished college in 1991, I got married, I was born in San Francisco in 1968, I moved to Washington, I moved to Visalia, I lived overseas, and I became a teacher. So this list of ideas is not organized. I don't have complete sentences, but I have my ideas written down so I can remember them. Free writing is writing sentences or parts of sentences, but again, don't worry about making mistakes and don't worry about being organized. I was born in San Francisco, and you can see I wrote SF for San Francisco. I'm married. I finished college in 1991 and lived overseas. I'm a teacher. I grew up in Visalia. I moved to Washington in 2009. I was born in 1968. So again, these are the ideas I want to write about, but they're not organized and they're not perfect. But I have my ideas so I can remember them. Another way you can do the pre-writing is to do a diagram. You put the topic in the middle, my life, and then have your ideas around. Have your ideas around the topic. So here are my same ideas. 1968, college 1991, married, grew up in Visalia, taught overseas, teacher, moved to Washington, born in San Francisco. I have the same ideas so I can remember them. The next step in the writing process is to organize your ideas. So you're going to take your list or your free writing or your diagram and use those ideas that you already have. You can add ideas, you can take ideas out, or you can change ideas. So you want to use the ideas that you start with, but you can always make changes. Organizing is important for putting your ideas in order. Again, don't worry about mechanics. So don't worry about spelling or grammar, and don't worry about writing sentences. This step, we're just focusing on organizing the ideas. So for organizing, you can make an outline. This is a very simple outline. My life. So of course I want to start with when I was born, or where I was born and when. And then when I was a child, I moved to Visalia. I finished high school. I lived in Germany. I finished college in 1991, lived in Hungary, taught English, lived in Brazil, married Cameron in 1991, and moved to Washington in 2008. And you can see now I made some changes. Before I said I lived overseas, and this time I decided to be more specific about where I lived in what countries. I added my husband's name and I changed the year. I had the wrong year before, so I changed that. So again, notice that I'm not worrying about sentences or grammar or spelling, but I have my ideas organized now from the first thing that happened in my life to the most recent one. And then you're going to write your first draft. And in your first draft, you will write complete sentences. You're going to use your ideas, and you're going to use your organization, and you'll use that information to write complete sentences. You can write just sentences, you can write a paragraph, or you can write an essay. In this class, we'll be focusing on sentences and a paragraph. So for example, here are my sentences. My life. I was born in San Francisco in 1968. I grew up in Visalia, California. So notice I added California because most people don't know where Visalia is. In 1986, I finished high school. I lived in Germany for 1 year. I graduated from college in 1991. I taught English in Hungary and Brazil. I married Cameron in 2001. We moved to Washington in 2008. So you can see again I have complete sentences with capital letters and periods. And I did make some changes, some ideas I put together, like San Francisco in 1968. I added that I lived in Germany for 1 year and that I taught English in Hungary and Brazil. These are the same sentences, but in a paragraph. In a paragraph, we have this space here called indent. So you have a space here that shows us this is a paragraph. Then I write my sentences, I put a period, and then after the period, I start my next sentence. I don't need to go to the next line. I can stay on the same line. And so I start with a capital letter. I continue. I grew up in Visalia, California, period, capital I. In 1986, I finished high school, period, capital I. I lived in Germany for 1 year, period, capital I. I graduated from college in 1991. I taught English in Hungary and Brazil. I married Cameron in 2001. We moved to Washington in 2008. So these are the same sentences that I wrote, but in a paragraph form, which just means the sentences go together, and periods are very, very important when we write a paragraph. You can find some extra information at these websites. And then revision is the next step. There are 2 parts to revision. One part is correcting mechanics, so correcting your spelling, verbs, and other grammar, punctuation, and maybe changing words. Maybe you need to use a different word. The second part of revision is editing the content, and that means your ideas. So maybe you need to explain more, maybe you need to move an idea, maybe you need to take out information. All of this is part of good writing. You can get help from your classmates. You can also get help from people in the Learning Center, from tutors there. And of course, your teacher will help you. I will correct your first draft. Here's an example of revisions. In the red, I have some mistakes. I was born in San Francisco on 1968. Oops, that's a mistake. I grew up in in Visalia, California. This is not a mistake, but it would be better if I wrote the word California. In 1986, I finished high school. I need to change the verb here and make it in the past tense. So for the final draft, you use your first draft with the corrections and suggestions. Then you write your sentences and paragraph again. When you're writing, you'll make the changes. And then it's always a good idea to type your final draft on a computer. Most teachers want those typed. So here's my final draft. I was born in San Francisco in 1968, so I changed this to in. I grew up in Visalia, California. Here's California spelled out. In 1986, I finished high school, so I have the past tense here. And here's my final draft, so that's all finished and I can start writing something different.